So it usually just takes me a few seconds to, I have to mute it on this end.
Sure.
Well, we might get some ugly echo in a second.
Okay.
So it usually just takes me, here we go. There's a little bit.
Nice.
I think we're good. I think we're good. Yeah, we're all here. And I think we have people even joining us today. So hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's installment of Succession Matters, a platform by which we hope to shed some light on the various topics of succession by speaking with professionals from all walks. My name is Chelsea Lees. I will be acting as your host. And today we are focusing on the big scary topic of negotiations. I'm so happy to have with me Kjel Erickson from Cassier Partners. Cassier Partners is a boutique private investment firm, and this firm in particular, we have been working with over the past little while to cook up some rather exciting projects. We'll get to that later. Kjel is certainly one of the most interesting people I've met as of late, with an insanely diverse background, including opera singer, guitar maker, and so much more. Kjel, I'm just going to turn it over to you to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Yeah. Hi, I'm Kjel. If you see it spelled, it's Kjel. And if any of you have a good Scandinavian background, you might be familiar with that. And if you're not, it's like cello without the O. That's the easiest way to think about it. I'm originally from Alberta, a very small town, only about 80 people. Businesses turned over all the time in our town. It's farm central as well, so you'd see transition issues with farms. So my background is I'm pretty familiar with the transition challenges of businesses and farms in rural areas. Now, like Chelsea mentioned, I do have a diverse background. So I trained as a luthier, which is a guitar builder, and I still have a woodworking shop in Alberta. I also trained as an opera singer, and COVID put a bit of a wrench in that trajectory. And so my partners and I started Cassier Partners. I come from this diverse background. I had also been working with a number of small businesses doing basically Internet of Things, anything related to the internet processes for small businesses, primarily in Alberta. And then as well as working with a microfinancing and small business lending organization called End Poverty. And so we work primarily in Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Central South America. Those were different types of businesses, but the challenges were surprisingly similar. And so Cassier Partners came out of COVID. Transition, people are sort of reevaluating their futures, what's important. My partners, Garrett and Elling is my cousin. He's from Abbotsford. Garrett, Prince George, friend from university. And we all found this alignment of values where we saw these small businesses from these communities. Legacy is a big issue. Where if you don't have someone to take over the business, what happens to this thing that you put so much time into? And we thought, well, maybe we can help solve part of that challenge, because we care about the legacy of not just the businesses, but the communities, all the stakeholders involved. It's an interesting and challenging problem to solve. So we thought, let's take a model that exists already and see if we can buy one business and sort of throw our hats in the ring, sort of from a private equity standpoint where we're fundraising to purchase a business, but a little less aligned with that where we actually want to be involved with the businesses. So I'm currently in my office in Mississauga. It just so happens the first business we bought and that we're involved with day to day, boots on the ground, is a family started, run for 30 years, business doing powder coating, which you may or may not be familiar with, but it's an alternative to liquid coating. We bought this business because the last member of the siblings who started the business was ready to retire. Kids didn't want to take over, and they hit this sweet spot or is a little bit too big for the average Joe to buy and a little bit too small for any other type of corporate strategic buyer to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And so we bought it, and we've been thrilled, not just about the success of the business, but about the type of family that we've been able to build here in the team, and the way that that's continued the legacy of the family that started the business, who literally put their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and was pretty all-consuming, as I'm sure any of you who have started and run a business for a long time know, that it's really hard to separate yourself from this thing that you've started and created. And we want to ensure that if we're involved, that we have you covered and that we can be the continuity of that. So we're excited to work with Succession Matching and Chelsea and Allison and the rest of the team there, anyone that you may have met, because we share the mantra of value for everyone involved, so that it's a good deal for everyone. That's the premise. Like it should be. There should be no one who's taking advantage of, no one who's has information that other people don't. You know, like we want transparency, we want like truthfulness and honesty. And I think that kind of segues into the negotiation piece of this, because to have real, I'll say profitable, but or truly successful negotiations, it starts with a level of transparency and honesty, so that people are all working with the same information, that we all understand the thing that we're negotiating for, and that we can all speak with the same language, same metrics, same ideas. And the places where negotiations break down is when you don't have the same metrics, you don't share the same ideas about pieces of the puzzle, whether that's value or how things work, whatever that is. And so it's on, you know, there's due diligence from all sides, and sharing the results of that due diligence to get us to a place where we can actually communicate openly.
Totally. And I think, I mean, you said it perfectly. I think that's really what separates you from a lot of other big firms, is that they're looking to acquire businesses, but just acquire them for the sake of acquisition, right? Whereas you guys seem way more invested in the business itself. And when we talk to a lot of sellers, we sort of have two different types of buyers on the site that we work with. We have the investor buyers, such as yourself, but then we also have Main Street buyers. And the Main Street buyers, I mean, are a great option. They're usually just like a, traditional third-party sale, but their biggest barrier is in financing, right? That's typically the case, right? But when it comes to engaging with like an investor buyer, we've heard from a number of our business owners that that's just a little scarier, to put it in simplistic terms, right? Because they do feel like maybe that legacy will be lost, or what they've built won't have the same meaning as it moves forward. So it's heartwarming to hear you say what you did in terms of like mission, because you guys really do want the business to last in terms of legacy, and that's super important. So that being said, maybe could you break down for me just sort of what like you guys are looking for in terms of a business?
So we maybe have a bit of a different approach than some. We're agnostic when it comes to industry, for example.
Right.
Now there's certain, I'll say that with an asterisk. There are certain industries that we prefer not to be involved with. Oil and gas is one of them. If it involves taking stuff out of the ground, we're probably going to steer clear of that. Real estate, we also have a tendency to avoid. But generally what we're looking for is, we have a few breakpoints. So one is we look at the financials, and we want to see a certain size for us as a buyer. Now, when I talk about size, I'm talking about, often it'll either be top line revenue, you're looking at your margins. EBITDA is a big one. So often when we're valuing a company, we're talking about it. Sometimes we talk about it as a multiple of cash flow. Usually we're not. Usually we revert to an EBITDA multiple. And So if your margins are way out of line, for us, we are looking for businesses that are generally well run and stable. And given sort of our level of involvement, while we may be able to do like pull off a turnaround,
Mhm.
we're generally more interested in continuity of something that's already successful or
Right.
doing pretty good.
Right.
There are other firms that specialize in turnarounds. We're not them. And so just acknowledging that up front. Another piece, we tend to look at things that say on an EBITDA scale, we're looking at things that maybe have 1 million to 5 million, which seems in EBITDA, which is probably pretty large for some small businesses. But that's where we found a sweet spot where it's a little bit too big for the average buyer and
Right.
your Main Street buyer, I guess you would call them.
Yeah.
And they're too small for traditional private equity.
Right.
And so we're fitting into this spot where those are the businesses where they're still basically a big family run business or a big sole proprietorship,
Right.
where they need love, they need help. And often if you have someone who's retiring from the business, who's the owner, who's leaving, they don't have the energy. Like, let's be honest, you're not a 25-year-old who's there every day, who's willing to put in 90-hour weeks if it needs it, right?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
that's not a comment on commitment or care for the business, but it's just time of life.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so when we can find that type of opportunity and we partner, so we've grown. So let's flag this right up front. We now own a few businesses,
Yeah.
and we have folks who are our age who come from our networks who are great people, sort of this is the type of person you want to go have a beer with and share your quality time with type folks. But they're also highly skilled operators. They understand the financials. They're highly motivated, hard workers. And so we found people who have the skill sets to go into the other acquisitions we've made.
Right.
And there are partners that we put in boots on the ground. So they're there, we work with them, we trust them, and they're running these operations day to day. And so if we buy a business, I have a commitment to this company, and we find the right person who diligently will care and steward the legacy of the next company that we're buying. Right. And there's someone who's young, who's willing to put in the time, work with the outgoing, with the seller. And so we find that person. And so what we're looking for is a business that energy has somewhere to channel, where it's not just, there's less potential for burnout or something. Like we want to make sure that we're investing properly from a time perspective.
Sustainably, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Size wise, we're generally looking for something big enough to fund the transaction, to pay people appropriately. Like we want to make sure that people are compensated fairly, that it has room to run, so that hopefully there's enough free cash flow that it can invest back in the business and that we can use the business assets to grow the company. And so that's one piece. We look at key man risk. Like that's a scary one. You might have a good business, but if the outgoing seller, or if there's a key employee who's going to leave because of the sale, is really the crux of everything, of the success.
Yeah.
Like that's a risk point that we really have to evaluate.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we're happy to walk away from if it's too risky.
Yeah.
We walked away from deals that the business itself was great, but unfortunately, like we didn't gel well with the seller.
Right.
And it was just a relationship personality thing. And we had to ask ourselves the question, do we want to be, so to speak, in bed with this person for 2 years or 3 years through the transition process? And it's maybe not worth our stress levels. Like, we value work-life balance. We value quality of life. We don't want to assume a business and assume with it conflict.
Totally.
Because our objective isn't conflict. Our objective is teamwork and how can we grow something together. And so we try and take a more holistic approach to the businesses than purely just financials. Will it support some vertical or horizontal expansion?
Yeah.
So our businesses, we just happen to get lucky, and we have one business that we're able to contract
Mm-hmm.
from one of our other businesses.
Right.
Wasn't planned that way, and
Yeah.
we don't plan our acquisitions that way. We're not thinking of it that way. We're thinking of, is this a business that has longevity, that can support the community, that makes sense metrically, but also from a community perspective and from a team perspective, so that we have the right resources to put in and we have the right relationship with the seller.
Yeah. And I think that model, and correct me if I'm wrong, that model was proven with the purchase of the powder coating business, right? Because you were able to expand on that pretty successfully.
Yeah. In the last year, we've more than tripled our workforce. We've seen our workforce churn go way down. So our employee retention is a lot higher. Our customer satisfaction is, even with the growth, I would say, is right where we want it to be, considering all the other factors. And so much of it goes back to creating a place where people want to come to work.
Yeah.
And they feel like the fruit of their labor is recognized.
Right.
And that's not just through pay, but that's through other acknowledgements. And it may be as simple as, as an owner, like this afternoon, I'm running production. And I'm out there and I'm working with the guys.
Yeah.
And I know them by name and they know me by name. Yep. And that goes a long ways to getting them to want to come in tomorrow and do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we've all been in that situation, or many of us have been on the other side, where you are working in a company where the owner just isn't around or doesn't care. And it's really hard to want to do well for a business that's making money for somebody else who's just not even around. Right. So I think that's an admirable way to go. I'm like really holding back to circle back to the EBITDA and the multiples, because but really, I think that's a definite separate. I would love to do like an episode just on valuation one day, how that works. Because I know it's a lot more complicated than just EBITDA. There's so many more factors that go in.
There are.
But I just didn't want to not touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Moving forward, when you do find a business, obviously you move through a due diligence phase and into areas of negotiations, which is what we're here to actually talk about today. We recognize that there's sort of that technical component, like you're just talking about, like all of the ducks have to be in a row. But then also an emotional one as well. And we want to navigate this topic very carefully, because we understand it's a sensitive one for a lot of people and business owners. I can tell you that from where we stand as succession matching, preparation is key, which is why we developed our formal succession planning program over COVID. That was our sort of COVID child, if you want to call it that, right? Where we just focus on getting everybody ready as best as they can be, so those ducks are in a row, and the emotional component is talked about, certainly. But I'd love to know, sort of from your perspective, when you're talking to sellers and you're in the negotiation phase, like how much of that emotional component do you see, and like how do you navigate it? Like how does that all come together or fall apart? Sometimes that's right.
I recently, without getting too specific about, I can't say too much, but I will say that we've had two contrasting opportunities that we've been looking at. And one we put considerable time and resources into. And it was a business where the owner is pretty advanced in age, but he's got energy, he's committed to the business. The challenge is, as any seller, you want to get the maximum value that you can out of this thing that you've grown, developed. And so we thought that we'd come to sort of an understanding of what was a fair valuation for the company. And then an offhanded conversation that this fellow had with an accountant who was not involved in the process, didn't know the business. This fellow just sort of suggested that, hey, you're probably not getting a fair price. You should probably sell it for way more than this. And that was sort of a trigger for him. So against his advisors who have been involved, his accountants, his brokers, business brokers who were involved with the sale, who were kind of playing the role of what succession matching does, against their advice and what we thought was a reasonable valuation, he came back to us and said, okay, I can't do this deal unless the price goes up this much, which was a deal breaker for us, unfortunately.
Right.
And it's probably, and quite frankly, it would be a deal breaker for almost any buyer, because he has this emotional attachment and he is projecting the potential success of the business and then trying to bring that back to right now. But his projections of what he dreams the business could be versus what is a realistic sort of price point, and you can do different value, and this goes to the valuation standpoint, or ways to value companies. So you could do a discounted cash flow, you could do different analysis to come back to some type of valuation. He's not doing those. He's just coming from an emotional standpoint of what he believes could be the real success of the company,
Right.
and saying, I'm going to buy into that. I'm going to buy into this emotional viewpoint, which is, I understand. And as a person, I get, but the challenge is that more often than not, the true value of the businesses you really have to find a way to, you can feel all you want, and that's okay, but you have to find a way to separate those feelings from what is truly a fair value for the business. And finding honest accountants who can guide you, who have an understanding for valuation, to find
which, sorry, I'll stop you there. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think a lot of people just feel that their accountants are good enough, right? Because they know the business, or they might have been with them even from day one, but not all accountants are skilled or practiced with actual valuation.
Exactly.
And then they lean on that EBITDA, or rule of multiples, and that can be tricky, right? Giving them a higher valuation than what the worth is. Yeah.
And you may have an accountant who's great at getting you, your tax return, getting your house in order every year, getting your books in order, but they're not trained valuators. And being a certified business valuator is a specific skill set that people put a lot of time in.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you don't necessarily have to be certified, but there are people who have that skill set and people who don't. And finding folks who do will go a long ways to helping you, from an objective standpoint, understand what the business is worth. That goes to something like, what is a brand worth? What are your intangible assets worth? How do you value intellectual property? And these are all negotiating points that have to do with, how do you value those?
Right.
Because for me, coming in as a buyer, and there's a small company in Fort Saskatchewan that has a local brand name, and it's recognized locally, but truly on the balance sheet, I can't assign that any value, which is an unfortunate circumstance as the seller to say, whoa, that brand name is me, and I don't want you to take that personally. This isn't meant to be a personal affront, but I need to look at truly how profitable is your business, unless you are a master marketer and have your, maybe you can value certain things through attribution models. And at that point, you're probably not just running a business in Fort Saskatchewan, you're running a much larger, way more successful business that standing on its own two legs will be valued higher. And we would recognize that. So it's a challenge for us. Now, we had another business where it's a seller who's ready to retire. Daughter wants to be involved with the business, which is really nice. And she's great. We would love to include her, but she can't afford to buy the business. And there's, there are challenges with just handing her the reins, and also the value of the business. And so we would be working with her. And we came back to them with a price that was lower than what they hoped and thought that maybe they would get. But they went and they spoke with their accountants and they talked it through with them, and they're pretty reasonable. And they said, actually, we think that we were unrealistic about what we thought was fair. And we'll come back to you. And not that our price is right, because that's the reality here is on the valuation scale, there's an agreed upon price.
Yeah.
And somewhere on either side of that, there are prices that you could agree on, and you slowly get out further to where both parties disagree. So you're trying to get it basically into a zone of agreement.
Right.
And what's hard is when you let the emotional pull of either party drag it into a zone of disagreement. And that's where the negotiation piece comes in. And that's why I was saying earlier, like transparency about everything. So when we're going through, typically our process is we'll sort of get serious with the company, like we'll go exclusive. It's like we're dating and we're not seeing other people, and you start to open up. And so they'll put together a data room, a vault of stuff that we get to see for our eyes only, and that helps us understand truly if we want to proceed or not. And it goes back and forth. And we open up the doors to the house both ways.
Right.
And that helps us be transparent about it and try and the data points take away the emotion as much as possible.
Yeah, totally. That's I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but BATNA. Do you guys use a BATNA internally?
We don't.
No.
But yes, like I am familiar with that.
Yeah.
And that's we kind of do it deal by deal, but that's exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for those of you who haven't heard the term before, this is something that we definitely teach in our formal succession planning program, is to develop your best alternative to negotiated agreement, which is your BATNA. So it's like, okay, this is what I'm hoping to make, right, out of selling my business. But this is maybe how low I'm willing to go, and for these reasons. And then, like you said, when you walk into that negotiation, there's a little bit more understanding and willingness for the wiggle room, right? And then you know that if you're getting offered like way below that BATNA, that's your walking point, or what's your walking away point. And the emotional take a back seat then a little bit.
Exactly. And the challenge here is it's a bit like selling your 1970 Chevelle that you've had your whole life, right?
Right.
And you have an emotional attachment. You know the condition of it. If you've owned it a long time, you know the ins and outs of this car. But you can also reference the blue book, like you can reference the value of the car, right? So you know what they're going for on the open market, and then it's easy for you to establish your BATNA, right? It's easy to say like, this is the no-go zone. This is where I'm happy to make a deal. Right. The challenge with a business is there's no real blue book value. So if you're lucky, you might have some friends who had similar businesses that they sold. You might have some sort of reference point to say, oh, this is fair. But more often than not, those metrics are, if they exist at all, they're hard to find.
Yeah, totally.
And so you have to open up this negotiation process to experts who can help you.
Yeah.
And so even for us, we have people that we refer to. We have our accountants and our lawyers and our people that aren't us who help us really nail down what is fair.
Right, right. Somebody not involved, right? Like not
exactly.
Like right
they
there,
have no
that objective.
They're not tied to it. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Super duper important. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where, because if you can get to that point, actually the negotiating isn't that hard.
Yeah.
I don't think.
If all those steps have lined up to that point.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And there may be certain pieces where, depending on how complex the transaction is, you have to negotiate things. And probably the most difficult negotiations that we've had, for some of them, where after the transaction has happened, but we're really trying to nail down, say, what our working capital amount should be that goes along with the transition, where the value of the company is fine. We're happy with that. But how much gets left in the bank account after the transaction happens, or the continued operations of the company, and what goes back to the seller? Right. Because that's a little trickier, right? Because most of the domain knowledge lives with the seller as to what's truly required.
Of
And so it's
course.
hard for us as a buyer. We can make our best assumptions based on everything that has been provided to us about what is reasonable.
Yeah.
Um, but that could be a sticking point, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Escrow terms, or those. So often, if we're buying a company, we may hold an amount in escrow for 18 months.
Okay.
And then if something happens in the contract, in the sale agreement, where there was a misrepresentation, for example. So a piece of equipment was represented as something. Now, typically this may not be equipment, but there may be a term in the contract, in the sale agreement, that is explicitly stated by the seller or the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's found within whatever the terms of escrow, whether it's 12 or 18 months, and this is held by the independent third party escrow holder, that if that was a misrepresentation, then there are terms that you can claim against the escrow.
Right.
So if we found that, hey, you actually blatantly lied to us about something, but this transaction still went through, then we can make it right.
Yeah.
But you have to pretty explicitly call out what is okay to make a claim against and what is not okay.
Right.
Or some of it you can make 100% claim, some of it you can make a partial claim. There's different sort of methods to approach it.
Right.
And some of those can actually be stickier points than the actual price of the business.
Interesting.
And sellers aren't always looking to get the most. We purchased 2 of our businesses. We weren't the highest bidder, but the structure of the deal was actually nicer for the seller, and they liked us as buyers better. So the difference in the amount was, okay, we'd rather work with you.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Because we think the business is in better hands and this serves us a little bit better. It's going to be an easier transaction.
Yeah. Yeah. When you buy a house and you write a letter to the owners.
Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
The highest bidder, but we're really good people and we love this house. And
yeah. So that's one of our negotiating points is we truly do want to make it as easy for you as possible as a seller.
Right. Yeah.
And so we may ask for a little bit less or we may not, but we think that will push you to want to work with us.
Yeah.
We seem like we're good to work with. We hope so. And we hope that we have a track record that we're developing that demonstrates that.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. And so you find different pieces where it's not just about money that you're negotiating on.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's so much more complicated than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All really good points for sure. So I'm cognizant of time. I just want to open this up there to questions. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to just type them in the chat there. I see that one has already popped up. We also want to talk about our program that we've been working on developing together, hey Kjel, for displaced Ukrainians. But first, do you want to take this question? Is that cool? Yeah.
Sure.
I'll read it to you. So Ms. Perot asks, is it better for all businesses to pay for a professional valuation or not and just go off of the EBITDA or what your accountant says to get the most for the business? And I think we kind of maybe just discuss that a little bit here.
I would start, if you trust your accountant and you can ask them what their experience is or if they have references for sort of how qualified they are to understand the value of the business. It's kind of up to you and the seller to gut check. Now, if there's a huge discrepancy, or you and the buyer. So if you're selling your business and you have an idea of what you think is fair and you've done some reading to understand how valuations could work, and then you go to your advisors, and that might be succession matching, who may be helping you. That might be your accountant, your lawyer, anyone who has some experience with transactions of this type.
Right.
And they give you a number that's way out of line.
Yeah.
And if the person who's approaching you and giving you an offer on the business is way out of what you expect, then start to think about what outside parties you can bring in to help you understand the value. So, and then understanding, talk to a few CBVs to see what the cost is.
Right.
Because you have to weigh, is it worth it? What's the size of the transaction?
Yeah.
and ask questions. Like, hopefully these aren't hostile negotiations. If you get an offer that's way out of line with what you're expecting, ask where they're basing their value, not because you're not aggressively, but just trying to understand. That's okay. Or take the offer to your accountant and say, where do you think they're coming? Like, where are they getting this from?
Yeah.
If I were trying to work back from this number to understand where it came from, how would I get there? Because you may uncover some things about the way that you're thinking about the value of your business that maybe I don't need to engage this person. Maybe I do as a certified business valuator.
Right. Yeah.
We typically haven't engaged a professional business valuator.
Right.
But that's because we have some transaction experience in the space.
Yeah.
And most of the businesses, the sellers that we're working with, have advisors. So they have brokers and accountants who specifically deal with transactions like this, and they're able to provide that guidance.
Right.
So it depends on who's on your side and who you're working with.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's kind of a wishy-washy way of saying it depends.
I think that's actually really sound advice, especially the piece you said about, don't just walk away from the offer because it seems out of line. Try to work backwards. Like, why did they come to that? And is it legit, right? Maybe there's some legitimacy to it that the seller needs to consider before they, even if they're moving into negotiations with a different buyer, it's not magically different. And for the record, for all the business owners out there that are, watching this, we do succession matching does discounted cash flow analysis for some of our members as well. So you're definitely welcome to reach out to us about that. Oh, you're very welcome. So we'll just take the last few minutes maybe to discuss the project that we've been coming up with. Hey, Kjel, did you want to talk about it or did you want me to introduce it?
Well, I'll start by saying,
okay,
I've referenced this sort of price or business size bandwidth that we live within, which is there are opportunities that are too small for us, given the model that we've approached with. And we're super excited to be working with succession matching to find a way to engage some businesses that fit within our bandwidth and some that are smaller. And as a way to bring in, so we're thinking specifically right now about how do we help Ukrainian refugees who are high skilled, they're entrepreneurial. These are people who are ready and primed to step in and work with the business and take over a business and run it like until they're ready to deal with their own succession plan.
Totally.
And so how do we, as Cassiar, as we're buyers, there are challenges with sort of the financing, and we're looking to step in to help make these transitions happen so that the right people can come into Canada and work as the successor of your business and take over and be set up to continue that legacy, to continue the hard work and grow something bigger than it is right now. So we're hoping to play like a meaningful cog in this machine along with succession matching to help.
We're so stoked to have you guys on board as well too.
So you can, Chelsea can give you the succession matching side of it, but
well, the full background is, and if you tuned in for last month on International, we really wanted to, because we've been for years matching local businesses, especially in rural areas, to international buyers. So individuals who want to immigrate, they can do so through various provincial nomineeship programs through the entrepreneurship streams where they buy a business. Now, we were like, that'd be great if we could just sell some businesses to Ukrainians who are being displaced anyways, especially our prairie provinces have a lot of Ukrainian communities already. So that would all work out well. But of course, there's lots of barriers to just somebody leaving a war zone and having to put up a certain amount of capital to purchase a business, right? And B, there's a 1 million, what's it called? They have to show that they have a
net worth. a net worth
Personal
verification.
net worth. Yeah, thank you. It was escaping me for a second. So, we played with multiple angles. We even tried to get the federal government to change the personal net worth thing. But so much so where we landed was, we need somebody to front that capital and help us out. And so that's where Cassier Partners really fits in, is we're matching businesses to Cassier Partners, even the smaller, medium-sized ones, to purchase so that you guys can hire Ukrainian employees, right? And I don't know that are we calling them refugees?
This is where that term is a bit tricky.
Right? Yeah.
And some of them may be. The important factor here is these are Ukrainian and down the line from other nationalities. These are people who have the skills. So these are entrepreneurs, these are business people. These are small business oriented folks who are looking to create a new life in Canada.
Yep.
And they're looking for an opportunity and they're ready to go. They're bureaucratic challenges,
right,
ultimately, and financing challenges. And so we're looking to solve those. One of them is, like you mentioned, they might have the money to buy this business.
Yeah.
But they don't have the means from sort of a legalese perspective, both from a nationality and from net worth verification, whatever, access to funds. They can't do it right now. So we have to get them here to basically get them on track so that a year from now, 2 years from now, that'll all open up.
Yeah.
And we're trying to give them the opportunities now instead of later, because it's a big challenge. So that's why they come in as a worker. So we can get them here through a worker stream. And so that way they work in the business and slowly they learn the business. And when the time comes and they're ready and the funding is in place for them personally, they assume partial or full ownership of the business.
Yeah.
And that just makes it easier than them having to do it all at once. It's kind of like, think of them financing the business, but we're not just helping them finance it from a money standpoint, helping them finance it from a PR from a permanent residency standpoint, from a getting on board with what does it mean to live in this community? How do I make friends? How do I get these social safety net supports? We're helping them do all of that and just spreading it out over time instead of trying to draw a line in the sand and say you either have it or you don't.
Yeah, which I think works way better than our initial, let's try to get business owners and, Ukrainians together. But I think this just, you're right. It's like an easing period, right?
Yeah.
They have that opportunity to ease in, and maybe they realize they don't like the weather in Winnipeg or Manitoba. They don't want to spend the rest of their lives there, right? So they're not,
I think that crucial. The cool thing there is we have some other partners that we're working with who, and given the domain knowledge that Succession Mastering has and some of the other partners about the candidates that are available, is we can do so much of that pairing in advance to really, like, they're going to come from a climate that is probably reasonably similar. They're going to come from rural communities. They're going to come from, they understand what it means to do different types of business. They're not just they're not bankers. These are folks who really get it. Yeah. And they get the business. And that's so exciting. Yeah. Absolutely. Because that ups your success chance
by so much. Absolutely. Yeah. And I can say that because we've brought over a few individuals from Vietnam and, they're shocked by the weather, and all of them love being here, of course, but definitely easier integration for that sense. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kjel. I'm cognizant of time here and I don't want to take up too much more of it, I'm just going to close this down. This was a really enjoyable conversation for me. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights. And if anybody wants to get in contact with you, definitely you can reach out to hello@successionmatching.com. Kjel, if you have any. I
don't know how to share my
I'll post email. It. Yeah.
But let me, you have it. You have my email. I have it. Post it.
I'll post it.
People are free to reach out to me with questions. Sure. I know the topic was negotiation, but we talked about a bunch of different things, and some of it was just the seed of a bigger discussion. And
Totally.
if there's enough interest, we can have those future discussions at some point, or sort of guide you to resources, because the resources to read more and learn more in your own time exist too. So
yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And if you're interested in selling as a part of the Ukrainian program as well, you can definitely reach out to us, and
we would love to hear
all
from
of those things. Yeah.
you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Kjel. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
And
you. You too, Chelsea, and everyone else here on the